Hello YouTube, Kevin here for Superpower Broadcasting. In this video, I'm going to be discussing Turkey's recent purchase of S-400 anti-air systems from Russia. Now, this sounds like something that you might read in some sort of ironic or uh, satirical sort of meme page somewhere about, horseshoe theory or something, but it is unbelievably ridiculous how the second largest army in NATO is purchasing um, weapons and anti-air systems from the largest enemy of NATO. That is beyond ridiculous. It is unbelievably, just repulsively grotesque for Erdogan to do this. Now, I had discussed this in the live stream last night with my friend Nightmare Fuel Reese and Henry of American Empire. We described this and talked about this as essentially being the nail in the coffin, at least morally speaking, for Turkey's membership in NATO. Now, Henry is of the opinion that Turkey should be booted out of NATO over this. I am of the opinion that this as well should be ultimately the impetus that will lead us to kick Turkey out of NATO. Now, I didn't always used to have this opinion, of course. I viewed Turkey, especially after the coup that sought to bring down Erdogan, I viewed Turkey as an anathema to NATO, to liberal values. That Turkey is essentially way closer to fascist Russia than to the liberal West in terms of the morality of their political system, in terms of the illiberal nature of their political system. And the only hesitation that I had, though, and which prevented me from arguing straightforward that Turkey should have been given the boot from NATO back then, though, was that Turkey was still, at least nominally, it was still a strategic partner against Russia. So I despised the Soviet Union, but it made sense to be allies with them to fight Hitler, for example. I despise Erdogan, but if Erdogan's going to help us take down Putin or curtail Putin's expansionism in Eurasia, I am perfectly happy to work even with somebody such as Erdogan, because you can't only work with people who agree with you on everything. That's the unfortunate truth to the nature of power in the world, right? That it's not the case that 100% of the power is in the liberals and the Democrats in the world. No, America has the plurality of the power. Absolutely, America is the strongest country in the world. But America doesn't have a monopoly on power. And Russia has a share of the power as well, as does Communist China, as does North Korea even. And so, in a world in which the most evil regimes are sharing the pie of power with the good guys, with the United States, with NATO, we can't act purely based on morality. We have to take strategic partners to serve current objectives, such as curtailing Russian expansionism. And so I had supported Turkey still being in NATO. The problem now, of course, is that my reasoning back then was, well, they might be illiberal, authoritarian, disagree with NATO on values, etc., and they might be tending towards Russia from a political climate. They were still a strategic partner. They were still in NATO's court, and they were still allied with us against Russia. Them now purchasing S-400 systems from Russia is a total stab in the back to NATO, because all that hesitation that I had was predicated upon the idea that Turkey was still going to help us challenge Putin. The problem is Turkey now is buying anti-air systems, the most advanced anti-air systems from Russia, the S-400 system. The S-400 system is intended to shoot down F-35s. That's its aim. Now, Russia doesn't have F-35s because the U.S. isn't stupid and the U.S. isn't going to sell Russia F-35s. Here's the problem. Turkey has access to NATO equipment. Turkey has access to advanced NATO armament systems. Turkey may be able to procure F-35s. And it is in this context that, especially if the U.S. has stationed in U.S. bases in Turkey F-35s, that it's possible that Turkey will be able to use the S-400 system to perfect it, to fine-tune it against F-35s on behalf of the Russian government. For all we know, there will be Russian technical support crews over in Turkey. There will be Russian technical crews over there. And they may use these systems to undermine NATO. They may use these systems to bolster the Russian anti-air system. They will use these to undermine American and NATO security interests. And so Turkey's going to play it like this. Turkey cannot be in NATO. I mean, it has to be an essential part of NATO that if you're going to be in the club, you can't purchase S-400 systems from Russia. I mean, you just cannot do it. That would be basically the same thing as if in, say, 1965 or something, the U.S. was going to sell West Germany some aircraft, state-of-the-art aircraft, and West Germany went and purchased, I don't know, the Buk system or something from the Soviet Union. Unbelievable. Just unbelievably trying to play both sides and get away with it. And Erdogan, in credit to him, knows very well that he can get away with it. Why? Because Trump loves authoritarian strongmen. Trump is an isolationist to the core. Trump looks at this and, one, he's stupid and probably isn't even aware of the story. But two, if he were, he wouldn't notice a problem with it because he thinks that Erdogan's super cool. Erdogan built a $1.6 billion mansion, I think it was, with the money that he robbed from the Turkish people. And he was so egregious about it. He even went and bought Italian trees. I think it was like Italian Mediterranean trees to line the gardens. Because it's not like they have those in Turkey. It's not like they have Mediterranean trees or anything in Turkey. No, he had to have the Italian ones and be all fancy or whatever. Because the guy to the core is a kleptocrat, just like Putin. Well, Trump wants to be a kleptocrat. He wants to be a dictator. He admires them. He thinks they're super cool. He wants to hang out with them and with Putin. He is only comfortable around the dictators. If he's in a room and he has to sit with elected leaders from Germany, Canada, the United Kingdom, he's uncomfortable and feels out of place. If he's in a room with despots and illiberal authoritarians, he feels in his element and at home and super happy because he gets to be pictured with the cool kids. I mean, it is unbelievably grotesque. And Turkey is now playing both sides, and they're going to get away with it, at least in the short run. Because as long as Trump is the president, he will not only not see it as a problem, he'll think it's super cool because he likes Putin and thinks that Putin's super cool. And so for Turkey to do this is actually smart on their part because they get the best of both worlds. They get the best NATO aviation, they get the best NATO equipment, and at the same time, they get the best Russian equipment. The S-400 has been touted by empirical sources as actually very good. And Russia, in credit to them, actually have good technology when it comes to surface-to-air weaponry. Part of it is because their actual aircraft aren't that well engineered, and much else of their military really is not very high caliber. So in order to protect themselves, they've had to resort to massive nuclear arsenal and anti-aircraft systems. But they do invest a lot in it. The S-400's capabilities are that it can simultaneously track and fire at, I believe it's 80 aerial targets. It's pretty impressive. Now, I don't know if it could actually take down an F-35 because the F-35 is so stealthy and has such an electronic warfare capability to it that it could probably outmaneuver and evade an S-400 system. The only question is, well, how many S-400 batteries do you have? Are they dense enough that you're able to actually make it so that the F-35 cannot necessarily avoid them? Because the F-35 is designed to be able to avoid these sorts of things and take the path of low resistance towards the target. If you're saturated with S-400 systems, that becomes more challenging. The S-400 is formidable. I mean, I'll give the Russians credit for that. It's a decent system, right? Turkey here is trying to basically get the best of both worlds, but at the same time, they're not necessarily playing both sides for their own benefit per se. They're not, in other words, they're not screwing over America and also at the same time screwing over Russia. It's more so they're screwing over America and NATO, and more so being, friendly with Russia, because Turkey's political system at this point, with the consolidation of power of Recep Tayyip Erdogan, is much, much more similar to fascist Russia's political system. They are much more closely aligned now than they are to NATO. NATO at this point is basically just somebody that they can blackmail for resources and armaments and argue, hey, look, we're the second largest army in NATO. You guys need us, so put up with us being a spoiled little child, basically. That's their reasoning. And of course, America will put up with it because America's run by Donnie Yes Sir Vladimir Trump. So this is an issue, of course. The other thing about Turkey is that 4 years ago, in 2015, they shot down a Russian aircraft over their border, allegedly, between their border and Syria, somewhere. It was kind of a gray area. The thing is, Turkey and Russia were basically on the brink of war for several months. And in my view, it was actually the work of people such as Alexander Dugin in Russia that paved the way for the Kremlin under Putin to reach out to and make amends with Turkey and actually not proceed in a hostile direction, but actually view Turkey as an ally. And of course, the consolidation of Erdogan's power really solidified in Putin's mind the idea that Turkey can play ball and actually be useful for Russia against the West. Whereas the West is still operating under this assumption that Turkey can be useful for us. No, they are a net liability at this point. They've been a liability for a while, but they've also had some assets. They were also useful in some ways. They are no longer in any manner an asset at this point. They are a liability, and they must be booted from NATO. Absolutely, without question, kicked out of NATO over this. The thing is, the ideology that Alexander Dugin has, and which Putin has at this point, of Eurasianism, of the fourth political treatise, of this kleptocratic fascist expansionism, they view the Turks, they view Turkey as a key and fundamental ally of what they see as a Slavic empire, basically, under Moscow. The idea that they can take Eurasia and they can conquer Eurasia and thereby conquer the world. They view Turkey now not as an obstacle, but as an ally and as somebody that will assist them in these aims to make the world illiberal and authoritarian and essentially fascist. And they're right in thinking so. They're right to not view Turkey as the enemy at this point. And Turkey's right to see Russia as friendly. Because dictators, they flock together. Donald Trump wants to flock with them. This whole situation in the world right now is just pure cringe. And it's unfortunate. Because if we had a real hawk in the White House, if we had somebody such as Hillary Rodham Clinton or Mitt Romney, or if John McCain had been president instead of Obama, the world would be a very, very different place today. One, Assad wouldn't be in power. Two, the Iranian Ayatollah would probably be dead and Iran be liberated. And it's likely that that entire coup in Turkey, there might have been Western support on behalf of the military to uphold the constitution, to uphold secularity in Turkey, to prevent Turkey from falling from the 21st century into 13th century dark age Islamic theocracy with an authoritarian supreme leader. This is a very bad state of affairs in the world. Robert Kagan was on Bill Kristol's program, Conversations with Bill Kristol, and he talked about the fallacy of inevitability, that we in the West often assume, well, because liberal democracy is the best system, it must be the case that in decades or hundreds of years that the world will be much more liberal, much more democratic, that these things will naturally flow. And he draws a problem with that teleology. He draws a problem with that and says, well, nothing's inevitable there. It's very possible that as he terms it, the jungles of authoritarianism will grow back, and that these authoritarian illiberal leaders will retake their place in the world, which they hold for thousands of years as the dominant ideologies, as the dominant way that humans were governed, where it was just normal to be governed by a despot. It's actually a very new thing for the American project and for the democratic project. And it's not inevitable that the democratic project will succeed, because we're governed by isolationists right now. We're governed by people who will not fight for it. They will not stand up for it. Well, it's not a logical thing to assume that Putin and Xi and Kim and Erdogan will not seize the opportunity and conduct expansionism and take advantage of our reluctance and forfeiture of the world. And this is what's happening right now. And in my view, nothing's going to come of this for Turkey. Nothing bad, because we're governed by the most feckless isolationists in the last 70 years. And we really need to get it together. And we really need to get that Cold War mentality back of, oh, this is serious. We might actually lose. Let's get it together. Because there is no guarantee here that the West prevails. The West is the best. But it would not be the first time in history that things went backwards, that things got a lot darker, and that you could look back on 30 years ago and say things were so much better then. And I don't want to be doing that in the 2040s. I already feel that way about now relative to 2003. And my fear is that it can get a lot worse. That even if Trump leaves office, that it won't be the end. That this, even though I feel that it's a fad of populism, that it could continue, that it could get worse. And Turkey right now is just seizing the opportunity, maximizing their benefit. They have, unfortunately, the correct strategy here, because we're going to let them do it. It's unfortunate, it's grotesque, it should not happen. They should be immediately kicked out of NATO. And the West needs to get serious about this and realize that we are getting played. We are absolutely getting owned on the world stage. All these alt-righters and everybody who talks about how, the liberals, they're all cucks or whatever. No, they're actually the cucks. They're the ones who are boat-licking and being subservient towards the establishments over in Syria and Moscow and Beijing. They're the ones that are basically being subservient to power in the world. It is unbelievably grotesque. So thank you for watching, YouTube.